Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ron Visconti with Phase 2 Careers, and you're in for a treat and lots of information with Dr. David Petrove, Creating Achievement Stories. And he'll just be joining us in a moment or two, but we have a few little announcements. This is Phase 2 Careers. We're a nonprofit for the over 40 professional. We've been around since 2010. We do several things: job search, career development, career transition, and small business. Next week, it's mainly focused on business. We're going to have a Renaissance Business Mixer on June 29th. We'll give away a free Chromebook for someone in attendance. We'll have breakaway sessions, and Anna's going to be one of our speakers. We'll have career resources, and David's going to manage one of our breakout rooms for networking. So it has all the makings of a good party. So you've got to go to that party. And then next week, if you're somehow have the bug to start a business, I have an orientation the day after the mixer. So that's what we have coming up. And in future weeks, in a couple weeks from there, we're going to have networking from Corey Hiramoto, who gave a great talk about millennial recruiters. And then we're going to have a talk on Instagram. So our speaker today, why you're here, Dr. David Petrove. Boy, I wish I could give you $1 million club, David. You give so many great talks, and he's been a frequent speaker around the Bay Area. He gives lots of lectures at different colleges. He was just mentioning a talk he gave to the University of Phoenix.
The University of Arizona.
Pardon me. I said the university. Totally different operation.
Totally different, yes.
And I know I met you a couple times at the Bay Area Psychological Type, which I know you have lots of certifications from that. He's a member of the Career One Stop, and he was an author of a book, and you'll have to tell us at the very end about that, Life Between Jobs, Out of Work, Not Out of Purpose. Great title, by the way. At this point, I'd like to welcome Dr. David Petrove. Hi, David.
Hi, Ron, and hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Oh, there's the book, Life Between Jobs, Out of Work, Not Out of Worth. And again, I will talk about that at the end of today's webinar. You know, I think I've coined a new name for what we're doing today. I am not going to call it a webinar. I'm going to call it a workinar. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but you're all going to be doing work today as part of this. This comes from my background as an educator, a teacher for many years. And what you will need as part of our workinar is a paper and something to write with, because you will be interacting during this. So what I need from those of you who are attending right now is to raise your hand if you're willing to be an active participant in today's workinar. Raise your hand. Okay. Well, I have it from most people. Some people are saying maybe not.
Well, some people raised their hand, but not in the chat.
I see. Okay. Great, because again, I will be calling upon you to provide what you've been writing, what you've been tracking as part of today's workinar. This is going to be a learning experience for all of you. And we're going to begin, before we even move into the slides, asking the question, how comfortable are you in sharing your accomplishments with others? Have you been a person who's tended to keep a low profile and keep your accomplishments under the radar? Or were you a person brought up to make sure that everyone around you knew what your value was? Only you can answer that. How do the beliefs that you have affect how you share those achievements? How do you go about keeping track of them? And what would be the best way to do that? That is what we will be working on today. Okay, so Ron is going to be my trusty helper, and when I give him the cue, he's going to move to the next slide. Okay, Ron. What we're really talking about with the PSRs that we're going to be focusing on today is having your results speak for you. Achievements are all about results, and that'll be the focus of today's webinar. Okay, Ron? What we're going to be doing is focusing on 3 different objectives. When to share accomplishments, what the accomplishment statements look like in terms of their components, and then how to write a PSR, which is a problem solution result statement. Okay, Ron. I think it's important that we begin with defining exactly what an accomplishment is. So I see an accomplishment as an action taken that results in a positive quantitative or qualitative change in the workplace. And we will have a workplace focus today, although accomplishments can occur in so many areas. They can be related to your health, they can be related to your finances. If you're a person who's interested in athletics, it could be accomplishments in that area. Again, today, it will only be on the workplace. Okay, Ron? What are some examples of accomplishments? Well, maybe you've received recognition for executing a specific plan, or you've contributed to a process at work, or possibly there was a product or service that benefited the company. What you want to focus on here is, how did you feel? Did you feel proud? Did you feel satisfied? Were you excited? This is all an indication that an accomplishment was in play. Okay, Ron? So why exactly is it important to track these accomplishments? And Ron and I were talking briefly about this. It's really about the opportunity to have a concrete record of your contributions to a company. You may be interested in asking for a raise, and you want supporting evidence that will justify that raise, or it may be a promotion. You obviously will use accomplishment statements as part of your resume. And we'll talk specifically how you'll translate the PSR into a resume statement. You may be coming up for a job performance evaluation. And again, you want to provide hard evidence of the changes that you've made during the year or whatever period you're being evaluated. It could be evidence of how you go about solving problems. And also, it's a great self-esteem and self-confidence building. For those times when you may not feel exactly strong in where you are in your job search, you pull out your PSRs, your accomplishment statements, and remind yourself of how good you really are, and that you're ready to be using that information in the next job that you have. What I want to do is to have Ron give you the ability to unmute yourself and answer if you can think of any other reasons why it would be important for you to have accomplishment statements. Remember, there's not going to be a right or wrong. You're not being graded on this. What thoughts come to your mind?
David?
Yes, Larry?
Yeah, I was thinking in the community realm, if you were to apply for some community organization, a advisory committee, any of these statures, obviously the fact you have the accomplishments going to put you higher in that list for that consideration, that particular role with the community.
And I mean, that's a great way to use an accomplishment statement to convince people of your worth in terms of bringing you on board if you wanted to be part of an advisory group. One more?
David.
Yes,
uh,
Anna.
I hope I did not miss this, but you give such great examples. But I'm thinking as a business owner, it could be important as well if I'm trying to get a new client to, tell him or her about an accomplishment story.
That's it. Your effectiveness as a business owner. What difference have you made for other clients? What difference have you made in the industry that you're in? That could certainly be a strong selling point when you want to bring someone else on board. Terrific. Thank you so much for those contributions. All right, let's go on to talk about these 5 components. And imagine that you're sitting in an interview and the interviewer asks you a question that is certainly pertaining to the position that you're interested in. Your response may come from a situation that occurred maybe 5 years or more earlier in your career. Would you have the specifics in front of you to provide that justification for your response? Would you have numbers? Would you have dates? This is where the PSR really comes in handy, especially now that so many people are being interviewed over Zoom. You can have those written on 3x5 index cards, and they'll never know that that's what you're referring to. They're just going to think that you have a great memory, and that's another way to impress them. And it's also an opportunity for you to review them before the interview, just so that they're fresh in your mind, especially if you know the types of questions they might be asking you. So we're looking at 5 different components, starting with the problem, P, the solution, S, the result, R. And then I've added 2 other areas to this, which are skills and traits or characteristics. And as we go through the webinar, you'll see exactly the reason for adding these 2. PSRs can have other names. It can be PSOs, problem, solution, outcome. You may have heard other acronyms being used. It's the same basic components that they cover when they do this. How many of you have heard of the term PSR prior to today's webinar? Raise your hand. Okay, I see 1, 2. Okay. I'm not sure about Krishna and Mar, but.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it.
You have not. Okay. How about you, Mar? Kevin has.
I haven't heard. My name is Mariela.
Mariela. Okay. Mariela. So this might be something new to you. Whether or not it's something that's being introduced to you now or you're familiar with it, again, it's a great review for those who do know about it, exactly how you put one of these together. All right, Ron.
Kevin, I think also wanted to mention something. Did you have a question, Kevin?
No, I just said it's very similar to what I've also heard of as PAR, problem, action, result.
Yes.
And SAR, situation, action, result.
And again, same components, explanations once we go through them. All right, Ron, let's go. Now, we're going to start with a problem. A problem is really a perceived gap between what is happening and what should be happening that's requiring an action to remediate it. One way that you know that there is a problem is through your emotional state or the climate of the company. You're likely feeling tension, pressure, stress, even fear. Think about a situation that occurred in a business setting in which you worked. And when there was a problem present, did you feel that emotional climate being present? And in some cases, companies do their best to suppress that so that people don't realize that there's a problem. But it will show up one way or another, mainly in performance, either of individuals or the company as a whole. All right, Ron. So let's talk about some examples of problems. You could be having morale issues. Maybe there are late shipment arrivals. You have to onboard new employees, or a piece of new equipment has arrived and you're responsible for getting people up to speed in a very short time. These are just some examples, and can you see how this would create the kinds of emotional climate that we were talking about? Think about a company that you might have been in where there was a morale issue. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced, and use your raise hand little icon at the bottom if you have that. That'll really help out in terms of getting a sense of this. If you've experienced morale issues in a company. Anyone ever run into that? 2 people. Okay. Kevin, Anna, Kathleen raised her hand. Larry did. If you haven't experienced morale issues, that's a great company to work for, because oftentimes that's an indicator of some deeper underlying problem. So here's where we begin the webinar. You all have paper and something to write with. Right now, I want you to write out a problem that you might have been facing in the workplace that was affecting either you or the company. A problem that you were facing that could have affected either you directly or the company.
David, I'm sorry. It doesn't have to be morale, right? It doesn't
No, it can be anything, any kind of a problem. Those were just examples of some problems. Thanks, Anna, for asking that. Don't worry about it being perfect. As you write your problem, we will be creating a PSR by adding the layers. And you will actually leave with a template that you can use. Let's move on to the solution. Okay, so a solution is an action that is taken to resolve the problem, which tends to be singular in nature. However, when you get to a solution, there can be multiple solutions to a problem, right? And the emotions that are typically attached to solutions are relief or hope. You are moving from that climate of stress, tension, fear, into relief or hope that something will change in a positive manner. Now, there are a various number of approaches that people use with problem solving. As I go through these 7 approaches, just write down which type of person you are. I'll give a brief description, then a title for that person, and if that describes you, write it down. So here are the 7 different approaches that people use. There is the approach of outline and plan. So the solution comes from, I'm creating an outline and then a plan will follow that. These are what we call the flow chart people. If you're a flow chart person, just write that down, flow chart. If your approach to problem solving is that you identify what needs to be done in a step-to-step process, you might be a roadmap person. We start with, here's the first step that we need to take to solve this. Once we do this, then we go to the second step, then the third step. It's rather linear in nature as you move forward. Another approach is the specifications definitions. What are the specifications of each of these pieces that go into the solution? Very, very detail oriented. These are the detail people. Then there are those individuals. Mark has his hand up. Mark, is there a question?
It's Mariella.
Oh, Mariella, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Marcy. Mariella? Okay, maybe not a question. There are individuals who start out looking at the people around them. Who do they need to tap into in order to solve this problem? These are the resources people. There are those who articulate a vision as to what the company needs to look like and how that is reflected in the solution that's applied. These are your bigger picture people. There are those who like to explore their options. They're the brainstorming people. And finally, there are those who approach problem solving with a new ways to approach the problem. These are the out of the box thinking people. This can give you a clearer idea as to how you approach problem solving. There's no right or wrong way. It's simply various ways. And by the way, it can also be a combination. Maybe you're a person. Yes, Ron?
I have a question. I like your system of identifying. Would it be helpful in the interview or performance evaluation or whatever to show that you have a variety of styles that would help, or does it matter?
I think when that question comes up, you use what you've identified right now and say, here's the primary way in which I approach problem solving. And it could be singular. Or you could respond with, I use a variety of approaches when I problem solve, including, and then you can name what they are.
Okay, thanks.
And then we'll see how this is going to show up as we go through the template that we use. And to see if what you listed as your way of approaching it matched what we put into the template as a way of showing that. So with this, what you want to do is the next piece of your webinar is look at the problem you wrote. Now, write the solution or solutions that you applied to that problem. You don't have to think about the result yet. It's a little too early for that. What was it that you applied at the time, believing that it would make a change with that problem? Okay, now we're going to move into the next slide, which is the result. So the result is the consequence or the outcome of the solutions that you applied. That result can be either positive or negative. Let's talk a little bit about a negative result. Maybe the problem was that there was a need for the organizational structure. So that needed to be changed. So what you did as a solution was to create a strategic plan that would take place over the next 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, that plan was not achieved. Here's where you ask yourself, what happened? Maybe your expectations weren't very clear, or you had an unrealistic timeline. And that's often what happens. We underestimate the amount of time it will take to complete something. Maybe there was an external event that took place, like a takeover or a merger, over which you had no control, but had a severe effect on the solution that you were applying. What is important here is not that you were a failure. What did you learn from what you did, so that you could carry that over into future situations? And that'll again show up in an interview when someone says, tell me about a time when you failed. You've got your story. And you can give them the reasons why and what you learned from it. So I learned that it's really important to have a detailed timeline that we're making sure everyone is on board with. And as soon as something changes, we bring the stakeholders involved in that problem together to figure out what we're going to do to address that. You don't have to wait until the very end to say, well, that was a disaster. And it's your ability to speak up. Okay, Juan, let's go to the next slide. Now, wait, go back one. There we go. What I did was add these two extra components, skills and traits. And you'll see the importance of doing this. Oftentimes, as people were pointing out with PAR and other acronyms, they don't necessarily address the skill initially or the trait. They assume that it is inherent within the PSR that you create. You'll see the value of taking a look at these two additional areas. So a skill is an ability that's developed through training, experience, and knowledge. Some examples can be writing, public speaking, troubleshooting mechanical problems, applying first aid. These are what I call doing statements. They are behaviors. They're what you do. And one way that you use a skill is what we call a natural talent. And each of you probably possesses at least one natural talent, which is a skill that you are basically born with. And when you are in the midst of using this skill, it's effortless for you. And the way that you'll know that it's a natural talent, other people will point it out by saying, I can't believe you do that so easily. I wish I could do it as easily as you. That's usually an indicator of a natural talent. If you're not sure what it is, ask the people around you what they see in terms of your ability to do something with almost total ease. The importance of this is taking this natural talent and using it as part of the work that you do, because it will be effortless. It will be a part of who you are, and companies will benefit from that. Let's take a look at some examples of skills. So we have speaking, listening, supervising, time management, which would be managing time. Of course, we know you can't manage time. It just does its own thing. You just have to work with it. Categorizing, verifying, organizing. What is a commonality among the words that are listed here? Like, with the exception of one, two, with two of them. I'll give you the exceptions. And so look at the ones that are remaining. And what is it that they all have in common? Unmute and then just tell us.
They're either quantitative or qualitative.
They Can be, yes. Something even simpler than
Wait.
that, Krishna. Just look at the words. What?
David, they have an achievement. There's an achievement component to that.
There is. Yes, Larry. And go even simpler than that. I mean, we're going for the obvious here.
We have Mariella and then Kevin.
Yes, Mariella.
These are, all of them are pretty much for manipulating, for listening.
Uh-huh.
Kevin had an
Kevin?
example.
Yeah, so they're verbs.
They all end in with what?
They're all verbs.
And what do they all end in, with the exception of two of them?
ing.
ING. That is about as simple as you can get it. When they end in ING, they're a skill, okay? And yes, they all have the components that everyone described. They are quantitative, they're observable behaviors. So that's what qualifies them as skills. They're the doing. Mariella was talking about that. So when you're performing, you're doing something. When you're accounting, you're doing something. When you're organizing, you're doing something. All right. So before we move on, look at your problem, your solution. Then what I would have asked is that you each put the result down of your P and your S, and then begin to use your analyzing skill and write down what skills would have been involved in your carrying out that PSR. Did it involve teaching? Did it involve categorizing? Did it involve verifying? Before we move on to traits, I need a hands up. Is everyone with us? Is there anyone who says, I'm totally lost now? Just give me a hand raise that I'm still with you. Great.
People have either done it by the hand or either, but not, or in the area where you signify the hand. So I think
Okay,
there's
great.
unanimous agreement on that.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, we don't want to lose someone here. Now we're going to look at the traits or characteristics. So these are distinguishing features or qualities that describe you. They're descriptive versus behavioral. So chances are, what won't they end in? From what we learned about, yes, Kathleen? Okay, for some reason, we're not hearing you, Kathleen. Huh.
She's
Okay.
unmuted. Yeah. Kevin, did you want to answer
You
that?
don't end in ing.
Right, they don't end in ing. All right, so these will be words like tenacity, creativity, innovation. If we're using descriptors, tenacious, creative, innovative, these are traits that would describe some aspect of a personality. And they describe specifically who you are. So I'm going to date myself here, and I am going to give you an intro to a television show from the 1950s. And if you can tell me who the character is, raise your hand. So it started out with faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings with a single bound. If you can name who that character was on television, raise your hand.
So Kevin was the first one to respond.
Anyone
Yeah,
else know
Oops.
that who that might have been? Oh, the character. Yeah, you get extra points if you remember the actor's name.
There's multiple actors.
Right.
Yes, that's true.
That's-
But one of the first ones that we're familiar with that was identified by these three traits. And it might have been something that was more easily identified from people who grew up in the country back in the 50s. So if you didn't grow up in the 50s and it's not familiar to you, don't worry about it. But for those who were, who was it?
Superman.
Superman. So this was Superman's brand. And you each have a brand that you carry with you, just like his. So brands are all about consistency, identity, and expectations. It's important for you to know what your brand is that's related to the way in which you present yourself to others. So how does your brand show up? Believe it or not, it shows up with the very first person you interact with that day. So how consistent are you? Will that person have expectations of you based upon those traits that they see in you in terms of their consistency? If you're not sure what your brand is, one way that you can do that is to find 10 people representative of possibly 3 different areas of your life: friends and family, co-workers, and people who might know you as part of an organization. And ask each of them to provide you with either 3 words or a combination of 3 words and phrases that come to mind as soon as they hear your name. That's your brand. What you're going to want to do with that is to look for patterns. Hopefully, with your consistency, you're going to see the same words showing up. Now, you may find that they're not always positive in nature, and that's okay because they're related to behaviors. And as human beings, we're able to change behaviors to something more positive. I had one person say to me, aloof. So I asked them about that. What did that mean, aloof? Well, as they described it, that characteristic was about being reserved. When I was in a new group, I wanted to make sure I understood the climate of the group before I started to share who I was. And for many people, that's more of a personal safety issue. And once they understood that, it really changed the tone of our relationship. So it's all right to receive words that you might not think were particularly complimentary if you do some digging as to what's behind it. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here's some examples of traits. We do have a few ing, but they're slightly different in terms of the words charming and encouraging. Look at these words, and if there are any that you think describe you, go ahead and write those down as part of your brand. Do you see yourself as adventurous, conscientious, dependable, meticulous? And when I look at the word meticulous, I would prefer that word over perfectionist. You have to be really careful with that word, because many people will use it in an interview. I'm a perfectionist, and it can raise red flags. Because do you know of anyone who does everything perfectly? Probably not, but you can be meticulous. All right, Ron, let's go to the next slide. Here we have your template for how to track accomplishments. You can start in one of 2 places. You can start with the problem, just like we did at the beginning, then move into the solution and the result, and then analyze that for traits or skills. Maybe what you want to do is highlight a trait or skill. So you would put that into the first box. Let's say it was meticulous. Then you would think about a problem that you were dealing with where being meticulous was called for, and then how you carried that through with the solution and the result. Could be that there were, let's say, problems with how someone was tracking information, and it wasn't quite as concise as it could have been. Through you being meticulous, you may have provided a different way of approaching that had a positive difference for the company. You always want to start with, let's say, the problem. You don't have to wait until you get all the way to a result to begin to track it. And I say to my clients, when you are starting a new project, when you're starting a new job, or starting today, begin to list the problems that you face. Don't worry about the rest of it. All you need to do is to be aware of it. And then as the solutions begin to show up for you using the various ways in which we approach problem solving, you begin to put those into that box. And it might be months later before you come up with an observable result. So this doesn't have to be done over a day or two period. You want to generate at least one solution. You want to demonstrate, and we'll be doing this as we create these PSRs, what was the growth or change that resulted? Finally, what were the traits or skills present within the PSR? Or you might, again, start with the trait or the skill and work across the various squares that way. This will help you as you prepare for an interview or put together your resume. So let's look at an example of what this might look like in terms of a process. Okay, Ron? Okay, here, the problem was that the company profits were negatively impacting the future of the company. They had stagnated over the past year. And the problem could have been that there would be layoffs or downsizing. And that was not something that was desirable. When you look at the problem, it's important for you to figure out who owns that problem. If you don't own the problem, you can pass it off to the person who does. You don't have to take responsibility for it. In a case like this, people who tend to take on other people's problems find that their plate is overloaded with problems because people would rather have someone else do it for them than they do it for themselves. Once you identify that you own either a piece or all of the problem, then you can move forward with your PSR. Okay, so let's see what the solution was. Well, here was one of the solutions. They looked at a marketing plan that would tap into foreign markets that were emerging. And it had a potential for $750 million in sales. So here you had a sense of hope and relief related to the problem. So what was the result? Let's take a look at that. So as a result of the solution that was applied, the company had a 48% growth rate at the end of the year. Now, that may sound good. You also want to find out, did it make a difference in a positive or negative way? Maybe 48% wasn't enough to keep the company afloat. So somewhere along the line, you need to have information that identifies what exactly would your end result need to be in order to save that company. The other piece of it is in applying the problem solving, the solution and result components, was there any kind of recognition for you? Did you get an award? Did you get a bonus? Was there a promotion that occurred? This is very important in telling your story. Now, this is something that was brought up earlier about the quantifying piece of it. Let's see, who was it that shared that? Okay. All right. Anyway, here is where the importance of quantifying and qualifying come into play. So at the problem stage, you want to be thinking about what are the metrics here? How do you quantify this? So maybe the company had $100 million a year budget, but that wasn't enough to survive. So the solution yielded $360 million in income through a marketing program. Again, the question is, was that enough for the company to continue? We see reports all the time about, you know, the changes that companies make, and this is the profit that it generated, and they still weren't able to survive or stay afloat. So you have to consider that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're talking about words that quantify. So these are time, income, profits, growth. And you'll be getting copies of the webinar, right, Ron?
If you want it, I'll make sure they get it.
Yes. Is that something that would benefit people, getting copies of the program so that you can refer to it? It's a lot of information. All right.
I'll send it by PDF.
Okay. So how do you come up with numbers, the metrics that quantify? Well, they can be done through forms you create, personnel who provide that data, feedback from stakeholders, annual reports, employee or client satisfaction scores, retention rates, any other sources that you can think of that would provide this information. Go ahead and unmute yourself and share that with us.
Well, David,
Yes, Anna.
I mean, in my area of work, I guess that also the very blunt numbers on social media. How many people have liked a certain post or an article you did on LinkedIn, stuff like that. And so it's then on me to take note of these numbers.
Yes. And if that is significant, you know, what would constitute a significant number of likes? And what, you know, is average? What is desirable? How many people was it your goal to have like it? And that would have been, you know, part of the problem that you identified, that you would be generating, you know, 2,000 likes based on the post. And that would tell you whether or not you were successful in achieving it. That's right, Anna.
And David, to Anna's point, we often hear this term on, especially on LinkedIn, of thought leaders, a thought leader.
Mm-hmm.
So do you quantify a thought leader by the number of followers they have? Is it based upon the quality of their writings or contributions? Or is it even something else that would quantify what a thought leader, or some combination of all these things that makes a great thought leader? I was wondering about that.
Well, what you want to do, Larry, is when you're in that problem piece of this, that's where you really want to identify what your metrics are about. The clearer you can be, the cleaner your numbers will be.
Right.
Okay, so at that early stage, thought leader, what one of the solutions could be, identify what constitutes a thought leader, so that now you had a metric that would support that.
Okay. Makes
Okay.
sense.
That's how you would do that. All right, let's go on. Okay, so here are some quantifying statements. So we're talking about decreasing delivery time, increasing revenue, enrolling a certain number of clients, or generating a specific number of clicks. Do you see where the metrics play into these? These are your numbers. Every one of them includes at least one set of numbers. So you go from 1 week to 3 days, from 7 to 3 days. That's measurable. Increasing revenue, all of these are measurable, and they will support the result that you get. Okay, let's go on. When it's not possible for you to have that quantifying information, and that can happen. Sometimes information is private. It cannot be shared among the general populace of a company. Your next move is to look at qualifying statements. So again, when numbers are not available, you could use significantly reducing time, eliminating redundant procedures, exceeding, maintaining, and you would be safe here. And if you notice on the slides that you get, there'll be a whole list of qualifying words that you can use. So if we look at number 2, eliminated redundant procedures on monthly reports, you may be able to go back and identify the number of procedures that you were able to eliminate. So maybe it was 3 when you looked back on it. You can also use low number estimates. Words like at least or something with a plus sign that would be considered a low number estimate. Like 300K plus profit or 300 plus K profit. By using low estimates, you're still accurate and you don't have to worry about someone coming after you and saying that was overinflated. You're safe. Now, using qualifying statements, it's going to be a lot better than if you simply wrote statements on your resume like adhered to policies or held meetings. The person reading that has no idea as to how effective you were. Those I call laundry list statements that are pulled off of someone's job description, so that anyone who qualified for that position would have the same types of statements attached to it. All right, let's move on. So look at what we had here with our problem solution result and the skills or traits. So would you say that the majority of what was involved here were skills or traits? If you think the majority of them were skills, raise your hand. Okay. We've got people raising their hand. Remember what the key is for identifying a skill. What do they end in? So the majority would have been skills. The only one that's really a trait would be what? You can unmute yourself and share that.
Drive and adversity.
Drive, yeah. All right, so, and yeah, trait, actually working under adversity could be either one. That was the one that crossed over both. So I want you to go back again and think about what it was that was your situation, what skills or traits you demonstrated. And in looking at this one, were there any other traits that might have come into play here besides drive?
We have a question from Kathleen.
Yes, Kathleen.
Oh, it just from previous. Okay. Oh,
Okay. All right. Were there any other traits besides drive or working under adversity that might have been present here?
David, Larry, I don't know if it's persuading or it can be justified as its own ing, and that would be advocating. But would advocating be a separate, different one, or is that persuading? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Advocating is different from persuading. Would it be a skill or a trait, Larry?
I can see that as a skill.
It's a skill.
Skill, learned skill.
Right, it's a skill. Any traits? Analyzing skill or trait from Kathleen. We're going to have our panel of experts now that you've all been educated in the difference in the two. Would analyzing be a skill? It's a skill, right? Any traits that are here? Tenacity, that would be a trait. Yes, tenacious, tenacity. Great. Thanks, Kathleen.
Commitment, commitment.
What? Commitment?
Yeah.
Okay, commitment could be a trait. Yes. Okay, now you're beginning to sort them out. I've done this with other groups and they still had difficulty sorting them. So you're doing a great job here.
How about observant as a trait?
Observant. Yes, that would be a trait. Observant would be the trait. What would be the skill related to it?
observing.
Observing, right.
Ah.
So you just put the ing on it. That's right. Just add an ing, and that's a way to distinguish between the two. Now comes the working-ar part of this. We are going to have one of you volunteer to share the problem that you identified at the beginning. Don't worry about it being perfect because we're going to work as a group to edit it based upon what was learned today. So who is willing to share their problem? What was it that you wrote down? Your opportunity to learn from what we're doing today. Take advantage of that.
Kevin.
Okay, Kevin, go for it.
Yeah, so mine was finding a market for a new invention.
Okay, so Ron's going to type that in, finding a market for a new invention. All right. Okay, now our panel of experts, now that you've gone through this, thinking about the characteristics of a problem. Has Kevin identified a problem or some other aspect of the PSR? See, this is where we're using our trait of critical, but not negative critical, just critical. When you're finding a market for a new invention, is that the problem or is it an aspect of the problem?
I can almost see it as the solution to a problem.
All right, so what do you think, Kevin?
I'm sorry?
What do you think, Kevin? Would we want to move finding a market for a new invention be more of a
No.
solution?
I don't think so. So what we did is we we basically phoned a lot of market leaders, lot of key opinion leaders, and asked for their opinion on different markets we could possibly go into with this device, and how full the market was and how many people were in it.
So isn't the question, David, what's it for, the purpose? It's not the invention, it's what's,
Now, what was happening in the workplace where you needed to find a market for the new invention?
Yeah,
Because
so it
remember,
happened-
we're going to quantify it.
yeah, it happens a lot where, you know, you're doing research and you discover something that does something new, but you don't know if there's a market for that, if that's good enough for people to buy. Will they buy it? And you have to ask yourself, will they buy this invention? And who do I sell it to?
but that's, aren't you asking, David, what's the problem? You just don't create something without a problem.
Right. Why was this created, Kevin? What was
Well,
the problem?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times scientists come up with new ideas. For instance, Post-it notes. So somebody came up with an adhesive tape that didn't adhere very well. So how would you sell that? And then they said, oh yeah, we put on a piece of paper and it sticks and you can pull it off.
But wasn't that the problem, that things would fall off? That was the problem, and finding an adhesive. Does that make sense, David? Product
Yes.
marketing people are always in the what if stage. They're looking at other markets, but they're usually asking people first, what's the need, before they go into solutions.
Yeah, it turns out that that's the best way of doing it. But a lot of times you come up with an invention for something that you don't know how to sell it. You don't know what the market is.
Well, my question would be, and Mariella has her hand up, so I'm going to get her take on all of this, and then I'll put in my 2 cents. Mariella?
So the way that is framed is more of a solution, but we can frame it as a problem by saying need to find a target consumer for this new invention.
Okay.
Or how to market this new invention, and that would be the problem.
Okay. So you need to find a target consumer for the invention. And if we look at that as the problem, then Kevin's finding a market for the new invention, would then that be one of the solutions that you would apply?
So one of the solutions would be, you know, just pulling different people that you think could sway the market, or could you want that have a lot of knowledge on potential markets.
Okay.
Because it's hard to get like a survey or something. It's easier to get key opinion leaders' comments versus a survey. Surveys, a lot of times you don't ask the right questions or word it correctly, or nobody responds.
Okay. So if it's a need to find a target consumer for the invention, is there any kind of a metric that we could apply in order to show change or growth? Because remember, that's what all of this is about. Taking some action that shows change or growth.
Anna seems
Yes.
to have her
Anna?
hand.
Oh, you know, of course, Kevin is the one who knows what the problem is. But for me, I still think there's a step before this that would be the problem. Why this new invention? I mean, even if you work with pure science, there's always a reason why you invest in something. There's a problem, and now you're going to solve it with your invention. And I'm being kind of very specific about this because I think this will inform then the solution and the result. So I'm still having trouble on what the initial problem was.
It's crazy. Science is crazy, and that's just the way it works. They'll find something
I'm married to a
like
mathematician,
rubber, for instance.
a
They
pure
invent rubber, and they want to know what can we use rubber for. They don't think, oh, we have these cars, and now they need tires.
But doesn't it seem, David, if you, to invent something without a market in mind is kind of the reverse. Usually you have a market in mind that you,
Okay,
I'm not quite wrapping myself
all
around
right.
the problem.
So here's what we're going to do, okay? Because we're forgetting this is an exercise. So it does not have to be perfect. Rather than try to figure out exactly what it was, we're going to create a problem where there was a need to find a market. So let's create, out of what Kevin shared with us, a problem. That was, for instance, why did we invent the light bulb? Well, because people needed to work beyond the time when the sun went down, right? So what you wanted to do, the problem was that there was not enough adequate light in order for people to work after dark. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So
Kevin?
the solution was that the light bulb was invented. We came up with an artificial source of light other than a candle or a kerosene lamp.
Another thing about the light bulb is it was safer than flame or gas lamps or oil lamps.
Okay, and that would be a part of the problem, that there was a need to develop a source of artificial light that allowed, that is safe and allowed people to work after dark.
Okay.
Okay, does that sound like a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Anna, does that sound like a problem? Okay, Mariella, does that sound like a problem?
Yes.
Okay. So is that something that's measurable? So what's the invention supposed to do? Well, it's a source of, artificial light. Okay, I think we have the word light missing.
Oh,
Does that help, Kathleen? Artificial light? Yes. Okay. That is safe and allowed to work after dark. Okay. So that would, okay, so the solution was that, what did we have to do? If that was our problem. Now there's a knowledge of the market through research and surveys. Would that still be a viable solution with this? Or would there be other solutions that we could use? And the point of this being, these are not as easy as people think. A lot of people will not sign up for this webinar because they say, oh, I can do this. But you can see there's quite a challenge to this, isn't there? There's a lot of thought that goes into it. So
it seems to me, David, also people's, whether or not they give good examples shows an example of how clear or fuzzy their thinking is.
Right. So everyone who reads the problem should be clear on what it was. And so this needing to develop a source of artificial light that's safe and allowed people to work after dark, is that pretty specific? We're not talking about a train. We're not talking about, a cigarette, anything like that. We're talking about an artificial light source. It's going to be very narrow in what it's going to be. So what would be a solution that would be associated with this? Scott?
To create a light bulb.
Okay. Create a light bulb. Okay, we're going to keep it simple. That would be one. We can add others. Okay, for the sake of time, what was the result? You created a light bulb, and now what happened?
Now you can work after dark.
Okay, so you would look at its effect on the workforce, right? So now, if we were looking at results, what could that look like in terms of a change? If we were looking at metrics, let's say, in terms of a percentage, it increased the number of people who could work after dark by what percent? Make up a number.
40%.
40%, okay? Okay. Safety. What would that result be?
Reduction in house fires,
There you go. By what percent, Kevin?
100%.
Okay. 100% reduction in house fires. Okay. Now, let's go to the skills or traits. What would those be?
Creativity,
Creativity,
Analysis.
analysis,
Designing.
What, pardon me?
what?
Designing.
Designing,
Testing.
testing, one more. Technical, good, technical skills. All right, now do you get the gist of this? So this is what you would apply. And thank you, Kevin, for, there you go, for being our volunteer to take it through a process. Again, not as simple as people think. It really does require a lot of thinking. And so you can see the importance of just starting with a problem. This is a problem that I'm facing today. The need to develop a source of artificial light that's safe and allowed people to work after dark. Can you see how that is in response to some type of stress, tension, fear that people would have? And so you create a solution that will change that and give people more of a sense of relief.
I have a question, David, related
Sure.
to this. As one builds one accomplishment stories, any advice you have to kind of test with other people how effective the PARs or the SARs or whatever.
Yes, so we're going, yeah, that, you read my mind. Okay, so basically what you do is you now look at each of the columns. You look at the problem column and say, is there a pattern here? Are these the types of problems that I'm typically encountering where I work? Remember we talked about the 7 different ways that people approach solutions? Do I see a pattern in how I problem solve? To create the light bulb, okay, when I look back at that, okay, it would be with the types of problems. Let me see, I'm going to look at my list of actions. So is this a person who might be looking at exploring options? That might be their way of solving a problem like this. Could have been out of the box thinking. that was reflected here. So you want to look for a pattern there. And then going back for skills and traits. As I identify the various problems that I deal with, do I see a pattern with the skills and traits that might reflect my strengths as skills or my brand as traits? That's what you want to be using this for. Now, the question becomes, how do we translate this into an accomplishment story? When you are in an interview, okay, the way that you translate it is to start with a formula basically that's 1, 2, 1. The problem tends to be the first piece that is presented. In a case of this being an interview, you might say, I was charged with having to develop a source of artificial light that was safe and allowed people to work after dark. And so you move into the solution. I decided that a light bulb would be a viable solution to this. Then you take them through the steps of your solution. The result being that after this was created, people's productivity in working after dark increased by 40%, and there was a reduction of 100% in house fires. That would be what you would share in an interview. The problem is equal to the result in about the time that you use to explain it. You spend the most time sharing your solution. So if you think of you had 1 minute, 30 seconds would be spent sharing a problem. I'm sorry, 15 seconds, 30 seconds as the solution, 15 seconds as the result. Oftentimes they talk about a 2-minute period. If you've ever talked for 2 minutes, you find out you don't think it's much, it's actually a lot. When it comes to the resume, your focus is on the solution and the result. Created a light bulb that allowed for a 40% increase in productivity for working after dark and a reduction in house fires by 100% or 100% reduction in house fires. That's what you would put on your resume. Those are the quantifying statements that employers like to see. What difference did you make for the company? So interviews, P, S, and R. Resumes, S and R. Performance evals, P, S, R. And that's how they translate. Now, what's great is you're each going to get a copy of this, right, Ron?
Yep, I'll send it by
So you will-
PDF.
Yeah, and you'll be able to go through this and spend more time working on how you would apply this to a specific area in your life. And you want to create a bank of these. The more of them you create, the easier it's going to be to pick and choose which ones you will use for whatever is needed, an interview preparation, a resume.
A question about that, David.
Yes.
As interviewers get very connected to your most recent experience, what's your advice about, having examples that are a little bit more dated?
I think they're more interested in what you can do versus when you did it. It would be wonderful if it was something that you did 3 weeks ago, as long as it related to it. But as remember, we talked about at the beginning, your response that you want to give may be more appropriate for something you did 5 years ago, because it's still relevant. If you look at the skills or traits, Are creativity, analysis, designing, and testing and technical skills still relevant today?
Okay.
So they're really not as time sensitive. You can also bring that in as an example of my designing skills. Then you go into the PSR. That's how you would use that. As an example of my designing skills, let me tell you about a time when, and then PSR. As I said, it is not as simple as people think. Yes, Anna?
Oh, I was going to ask you when you mentioned the flowchart people, the detail people, etc. If like a flowchart person tends to use more some skills versus, if there's some correlation between, I think I'm an out of the box person, a combination of that and resource person. Would does that translate into me using particular skills when I'm
Okay, so when we look at various personality types, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, my clients who are NT, intuitive thinkers, I find a lot of them in the area of technical positions. They love doing flowcharts. So when I give them an assignment, I say, do this as a flowchart. Oh, they can't wait to get started on it. Other types would look at that like someone who was an intuitive feeler would say, I wouldn't know where to begin, but I can talk about possibility. We could do this, we could do this. They can be the out of the box thinkers, the brainstorming people. So yes, there are going to be types that are more reflective of how they approach problem solving. And again, it's what you do, that you explain to them when they ask, how do you do problem solving?
Thank you, David.
So let's go to the next slide. So using raise of hands, can you now recognize situations in which your accomplishments are vital? Raise your hand if you can do that now. Okay, see hands up, great. How about, can you identify the 5 components of accomplishment statements? Yes or no? Raise your hand. PSR trait skills. Finally, can you write a PSR statement or at least know how to go about it? Raise your hand. Let me see. Yep, that's going to be the biggest challenge for people, is practicing that. Like anything else, it's a skill. The more you do it, the more comfortable you will become in terms of writing these out. So we're at the bottom of the hour. Do we have time for any questions? I know people ask them along the way. Anything that you'd want to know now that is burning?
Well, I was gonna,
Yes, Scott.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. I missed the first part of the meeting. Is there a way I can watch the recording?
I'll be able to send you the PDF.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay.
I was gonna ask you, David, having done many interviews, I could tell right away when there's a fuzzy thinker and a very unclear applicant versus a very focused applicant, and PARS, SARS, whatever acronym you want to use, it has a lot more punch right from the start.
Yes. Think about the person sitting in the interviewer's seat. Are they going to go for the fuzzy thinker or the clear thinker? This is your opportunity to demonstrate which of those you are. It also shows your level of preparation and understanding what you bring to the setting. You become a much stronger candidate.
It puts too much work on the interviewer to pull things from the interviewee.
Yes. And I will tell you, interviewers are not necessarily well trained in interviewing. So this is your opportunity to guide them. Give them what they need in order to make the right decision. Think about this in terms of using quantifying statements, qualifying statements versus, well, I held meetings. I conducted performance evals. Well, so do a lot of other people. How well did you do it? You know, if you're a person who is a designer, you want to have a story similar to the one we did with the light bulb. Here was the problem that we were dealing with specifically. Here's the solution that I applied, with the result being, and we came up with great percentages that showed change and growth and improvement. That's what you're there to do, because that's what those companies are all about. If not, they don't survive. Any other questions as we close today?
David, do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
So I wrote a book based upon my involvement with Larry's group back in 2013, and it became Life Between Jobs, Out of Work, Not Out of Worth. And it is comprised of 7 chapters. The first being addressing the idea of change and transition, then looking at the 5 psychological aspects of what's involved with that, which are self-confidence, perseverance, acceptance, resilience, and commitment. And then there's a final chapter to those who are surrounding the job seeker and the type of support they can give. All of these sections have exercises in them to help you to identify how you can become stronger in any of those areas. That is now being accompanied by a workbook that I'm next to finishing that will expand upon that. So that is in the works to come out in late summer. So for some people, they may want to wait until both books, or certainly you can start by purchasing the first one. People said it's really been helpful to them in thinking about who they are. This is not a how to get a job book, by the way. This is not about how to interview, how to fill out an application. Lots of books on that. This is specifically on what you experience psychologically as you go through this time period.
Any
And
final?
Oh, I was going to add, and to add to what David just said, I've been exploring with a couple of networking groups on how the book and maybe the workbook later would be used in a very positive group collaborative environment. I think we all benefit more when we trade off with each other. We just learn more that way. So I'm happy to support David in that effort.
Thank
Right.
you. And the book is designed so that you can read through each of the sections. They're only several pages long each. Then you have the exercises that accompany it so that you can bring it back to the group for discussion. What did you learn from that? How can you apply that in what you're doing?
Love the content, all the parts of the book, David, and you always give lots of new tools for people to think about, but having clarity in your job search is what it's all about. And this is one very powerful tool.